Okay, so I guess we can get started now. So I'm super excited to do this today. I have on Christy Dopf, and she is an activist who is involved with the Unity for J campaign. And she's the spokesperson and the Twitter team admin. And she's also the co-host of the Free Assange Vigils. And those take place on Wednesdays at 10 p.m. East Central on the Action for Assange YouTube channel. And I'm going to put the link to that afterwards once I upload the video, so you guys can watch for yourselves and tune in on Wednesdays. And the team is actually currently fundraising to travel to DC and London for Julian Assange's extradition hearing in 2020 in February. So I will also have the link to that GoFundMe as well, so you can check it out. But you should also go follow Christy. Your username is Christy Dopf, just Christy and then DOPF, and you can, your pinned tweet, I believe, it includes the link to the GoFundMe, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So make sure you contribute so that they can go. But this segment today, what I wanted to do is go through some basic questions that people had regarding Assange and his case, because I feel like there's so much that we might think that we know or that we'd like to know, that there isn't a video that people can go to where they can access all that information easily. And this, I feel like, would just be a great way of addressing all of those concerns and questions and whatnot. So then people can always turn to this and share it with friends, and because this is one of the most important cases, and there's a huge smear campaign against Assange that we need to fight back against, and we do need to be very aware of his of what's going on with him. So that being said, I wanted, yes, absolutely, thank you for coming on. That's the other thing, because this is, it's so much better for me to be able to talk to someone who knows the information instead of me having to look it up and potentially coming across information that isn't correct, and that it is.
There's a lot of information out there. It's a complex case, and there's a lot of disinformation out there, and that's
exactly
one of the things as an activist in this movement. I feel that is something we really have to keep doing, is to keep educating to new audiences and help people obtain the right information on the case. And even like in the past, I mean, a lot of things have happened in the last decade that maybe aren't as relevant today, but you'll hear them be regurgitated as smears against Julian Assange. So I think it's really important to continue to help people understand what is really happening and what's not really happening.
So that being said, my first question would be if you could explain kind of the beginnings of WikiLeaks and why Julian started it, so that people know what the motive behind that was, and why he felt compelled to start WikiLeaks.
Yeah, so one of my favorite quotes from Julian is actually in his very last interview. And if you go to my YouTube page, I have clips that I cut up of that. I also have his AMA from 2017 that has a lot of good information. But one of the things he says about WikiLeaks is he started WikiLeaks to know the fate of mankind, and that the purpose of WikiLeaks was to understand mankind, and from that, hoping to produce a less worse version of human civilization. So he's given some different answers on that, but that I really like that quote. Assange is, he started out when he went to university as a physicist, and that's what I started out as in college. So I kind of have this like kindred spirit with him of a little bit of science, and I kind of geek out when he starts getting really deep into some science explanations. And one of the like main fundamentals of WikiLeaks is scientific journalism. And Julian gave a great talk in 2010 in California, actually. A lot of people don't know he's been to the US and has spoken. This was April 2010, so way before any of the stuff in Sweden and his arrest in the UK happened earlier that year. So just to kind of give you an overview, scientific journalism is journalism practiced as a science, and this means that all information should be verified and that all of the source material should be available in full and not just a prepackaged anything redacted. This is the raw material And that's how he based WikiLeaks. And that's something important, even as activists thinking about making sure we source everything, making sure everything's accurate, making sure we can point to where quotes and stories are coming from, and verifiable sources. And, you know, this type of journalism really isn't practiced anywhere else consistently. And I mean that in sort of like the mainstream version of journalism. But it has led WikiLeaks to have 100% accuracy records. So it works.
Yeah, so the entire purpose is, I like it because it is like scientific, where there's no opinion there. This is just simply the facts, and it's available, you know, to everyone. And there's, you know, there's no heavily redacted versions of any kind of report or anything. So yeah, that to me is, I really like that concept of scientific journalism, and I really think that WikiLeaks is the only example that does that, you know, 100%. So yeah, I think that's.
And at that time, I mean, WikiLeaks had been going for a couple years in 2010. He explained in that talk as well why they sort of converted from just releasing raw information to starting to give somewhat of a summary on the information, because they were really hoping that everybody would just sort of crowdsource, that when they would drop information, everybody would just immediately start working on it. And some of the things they've released are so dense and there's so much material that they did start to realize they needed to give somewhat of a synopsis of what it was, give some context. They do a really good job of, if you go to wikileaks.org and you click on a drop and you read their summary, they're not telling you what to think, but they're giving you some different perspectives and sort of framing why this drop is important. So some people say that, oh, well, WikiLeaks, they just drop information. They don't actually, they're not practicing journalism, but there is, you know, some article writing, some summaries being written. Mm-hmm. They have to go through this information, figure out why it is, why it's important to the public to know, because that's one of the things. They're not going to release things that aren't in the public interest. Not only do they have to verify it's 100% accurate, but they also have to verify that it's going to be relevant. And Julian talks a lot about how whistleblowers and their sources are seeking some form of justice by releasing this. Mm-hmm. And so they want to give the maximum amplification to achieve that justice. Not only are they protecting their sources and trying to keep their sources anonymous and protected, but they're trying to maximize that effort of justice too.
Yeah, absolutely. I saw like with the recent OPCW drop, right, where they have this summary and everything, but you read the summary, they're not trying to suggest anything, like they're not putting any opinion there. They're just really summarizing exactly what the email that they had released was. So yeah. So my second question then was the basic overview and the beginning of the smear campaign as well against Assange, once he started to become more and more of an imminent threat.
So I think as far back as 2009, maybe even before, I mean, they were dropping some leaks since 2007, I believe. Julian and WikiLeaks knew that the US was going to come after him, and especially working on the Afghan and Iraq war logs and cables. They started to indicate that, you know, there was this secret WikiLeaks grand jury, and they had information that they knew the Pentagon was going to do something to discredit him, come after him. All this was proven correct. I mean, today we know that's correct, but even as far back as 2017, just a few years ago with the Stratfor emails, there are CIA contractor emails talking about this, talking about all the things they are going to do to Assange, chasing him from country to country, taking away his financial abilities, going after his family, targeting people that are related to working for anything with WikiLeaks. So yeah, this started a decade ago, really. And really what kicked it off was the incident in Sweden, and that was in August of 2010. So that is, I don't know if you want to go into Sweden and what that situation was or wasn't. But so there were 2 women who wanted Julian Assange to take a STD test, essentially. They were trying to get a hold of him, couldn't get a hold of him, so they went to a police station to somehow try to get them involved as far as forcing him to do this. And then it kind of occurred over a weekend, so there was sort of a lag of communication. And there are, some theories on whether or not this was a whole honeypot situation, or it was a situation that just conveniently fell in their laps that they were able to take advantage of. So either way, it has turned into a 9-year-long investigation. So what happened, Julian Assange stayed in Sweden for 5 weeks afterwards, working with the police, working with the investigation, giving some testimony. A lot of things were very strange about it. A lot of things were getting leaked. And then it was dropped, picked up by another prosecutor, and then turned into, from this request for like an STD test, to rape allegations. And then there was the broken condom, and so this just kind of kept snowballing. And they were getting ready, WikiLeaks was getting ready to drop the Iraq war cables, and so he had to come back to the UK. He asked the prosecutor permission to come back to the UK. That's a big smear, is that he fled Sweden, and that is not accurate. So he got permission, came to the UK, and then almost immediately after he left, that same prosecutor issued the European arrest warrant and put a red alert on it, which is what we do, what other countries do for terrorism suspects. And so that arrest warrant, he was eventually arrested on in December of 2010. He spent about 10 days in prison then. He came out of it and was in house arrest through the proceedings over the next almost 2 years before he went into the Ecuadorian embassy. That arrest warrant on this investigation, which was dropped eventually again, was what the bail charge then was given earlier this year. And so really, you look at it, this investigation has been dropped 3 different times, has had multiple prosecutors on it. He had to have his lawyers go to the Swedish Supreme Court to get them to come to London to interview him, because they kept stalling. And yeah, so I mean, this thing kind of drug out, and while it was dragging out, it just did so much damage to his character, because then he started to get the rapist tag on it. And a lot of confusing pieces, a lot of back and forth pieces, a lot of, we have emails now that in 2013, Sweden tried to drop it, but the Crown, essentially the UK said, nope, you're gonna keep this going. And so
how were they able to find that email? How were they able to get their hands on it?
Freedom of Information Act, I think.
Okay.
Those emails did. And not everything has been released on that. A lot of journalists are trying to get more freedom of information cases to get some of these emails between the UK and Sweden on what exactly was going on during this time. So he, his whole thing with Sweden was that he would go back, he was fine with cooperating, but he felt it was being used as a way to extradite him to the US. And then this WikiLeaks secret grand jury would take into effect, and these indictments would come upon him. So that is why he sought asylum. Now, that's another smear, is that he was hiding in the basement of an embassy for 7 years. But really, it was never the plan to stay there so long. I mean, he should have had the right to travel diplomatically after receiving the asylum to Ecuador, but the UK refused to grant that. and threatened to arrest him even if he went outside or to the roof of the building. I mean, so it sort of became this standoff of him in the embassy. And meanwhile, that building became the most surveilled and monitored building in probably the world. I mean, we had visible cameras outside around the building, and then now we're finding out how he was spied, and every aspect of his life in the embassy was watched and spied on. And there's a current court case in Spain over that right now. And then, you know, as he was in the embassy and doing different types of releases through WikiLeaks, I mean, he was still the editor of WikiLeaks up until just about, I think, 2018, after he lost, end of 2018, when he was gagged from the internet. You got different smears. So like once the DNC emails came out, then came the Russia smears, the Trump smears. And then, you know, more recently, it's he wasn't taking care of his cat. I mean, there have been over the course of the decade a lot of different smears on his person, on what kind of a person he was, whether he was a narcissist, how clean of a person and hygienic of a person he was.
That was, yeah.
So yeah, a lot of just these character smears, they come and go. And you know, after he was pulled out of the embassy, stripped of his citizenship and asylum in April of this year, then the Swedish case got reopened. So then it was like that smear got to come back up too. Like everybody had forgotten about that.
Sorry. So I wanted to ask, so that was because the president of Ecuador, they changed leadership, and then this one was more US friendly, and then that's why they revoked his asylum. Is that?
Yeah, so Rafael
what happened?
Correa was the president of Ecuador when Julian Assange was granted asylum in 2012. And then Lenin Moreno came into power, I think, at the end of 2017. And really I think he was previously on Rafael Correa's cabinet and was really supposed to continue on the work that he'd done in Ecuador, and really just sort of turned his back on all those policies and the Ecuadorian people, because really there has been some uprising in Ecuador over issues there too. And yeah, I mean, you can go through and see how, like, when Mike Pence went to Ecuador and there was a discussion over Assange and, you know, the famous IMF loan that Ecuador got, you know, days after Julian Assange, days before or after he was arrested. And so essentially, we talk about this on the vigils a lot. Essentially, Assange was trafficked. Like, he was bought and paid for, and he was trafficked out of the embassy. When you have asylum and citizenship in a country, the ability to strip those away, there's a legal process that you're supposed to go through to take that away from people, and that was not followed. So you have international laws essentially being broken in this case.
So one of interesting question was, he's an Australian citizen. So why hasn't the Australian government decided to protect him? And why have they allowed this to happen to an Australian citizen?
Yeah, Australia now has a parliamentary group that is formed and is working. There's a few different campaigns in Australia that are starting to really get going. It's a good question. Why hasn't Australia stepped in before? I think a lot of it probably has to do with US influence, and the US is the bully in this situation. They're the bully to Ecuador, the bully to Australia, likely very much the bully to Sweden and the UK. So yeah, it's I don't know for sure why they haven't stepped in. I think
that's what I figured is that.
But I think it's been a lot of foreign influence. Yeah.
But they very well could have just provided him refuge in his own country, instead of, you know, forcing him, or not necessarily forcing him, but making it so that his only option was to go to Ecuador to get that asylum there. So that was my question, was they could, but they're not, right?
Unfortunately, that Australia has kind of been a lame duck in this situation. They're starting to get more of a presence and a kind of, I mean, this stuff obviously takes a long time to form and campaigns to start, but yeah, they're a little late in the game. But hopefully, maybe one of the things that could save him is if Australia does stand up for him and step up and say, no, he's our citizen, you're not going to extradite him to a country that has the death penalty, which there is a treaty between the UK and the US that they're not supposed to extradite anybody on a political offense or anybody to a country that uses the death penalty. So for a lot of reasons, this extradition request and trial are not legally sound.
So my question also was, so why would they extradite him over these rape allegations? Is that like, that's Sweden's business. How is it that now it's the US's business to, for him to be extradited and for us to take care of that incident? Is that just because of the Espionage Act then?
Well, yeah. So the U.S. is trying to extradite him under the indictments that I believe 17 of them. There's 18 total, but yeah, some of them are under the Espionage Act. And you're also, and that is, up for interpretation on, he's not a U.S. citizen, that none of this publishing even happened in the United States. So the legality of using the Espionage Act against a non-citizen, there was some amending to the Espionage Act in 1961 that sort of opened it up to be used anywhere, but it really hadn't been before in this way, not only for a journalist, but a foreign journalist publishing on foreign soil. So yeah, the US is calling for extradition over the leaks from Chelsea Manning that were published. Sweden was calling for his extradition or him to be brought back for their investigation, which has now been closed again.
And how many times has it been closed? Is it 3 or 4? This is
at the third. There was almost a fourth one at another point in time. So yeah.
So it's weird that they could potentially charge him with that, because again, he's not a citizen of the United States. And so are they just alleging that he is working for some foreign government and to release this information?
I don't think in these indictments that he's been alleged to working for a foreign government. I haven't looked at them in a while, but I don't think they name another government. The DNC leaks are what gets kind of him being accused of working with Russia specifically. So yeah, there's the sexual allegations investigation. There was never any charges there. The bail charge in the UK that he served time for and has completed already is from that investigation, an old arrest warrant that was essentially invalid, but sort of left hanging by a UK judge to use just in case. So yeah, that was where that bail charge came from. He has served that time, that completed in September. He is now being held as a political prisoner awaiting extradition hearing. The UK really doesn't have a legal basis or charge or sentence to be holding him in Belmarsh, a maximum security prison in solitary confinement. So, and then, yeah, the US is calling his extradition for these indictments, which are over the Chelsea Manning leaks.
And could you explain his condition right now to people, how I mean, it really is, psychological torture. And also what he experienced, in the Ecuadorian embassy as well. If you could explain those, I think that would be good.
So Julian's health has been a risk factor for him for a number of years in the embassy, being completely isolated indoors, not getting any outdoor air, sunlight, not really getting a whole lot of exercise or ability to exercise in very close quarters, not being able to go outside to exercise, of course. Also, when he was gagged, from the internet, they also limited his visitors. Well, his visitors were the ones bringing food, his lawyers, his team. So there were, through 2018, there were some periods where he wasn't necessarily eating every day because he didn't have food. So not only do you have those physical circumstances, but he was also being spied on. He was also, mentally being messed with, psychological torture, that he was, there was a period of time when he said every time he tried to sleep, there'd be knocking on the window. There was an alleged break-in at one point. So he was always kind of on that high alert to if somebody was going to come in and grab him. Just different noises, being unable to sleep at night. He was dealing with a lot of different forms of pain from when he was in prison in 2010. They put metal shards in his food and he cracked his tooth. He had some shoulder pain. The open letter that has been signed by like over 65 doctors now kind of goes through all the different health concerns he's had over the last 10 years essentially. And now he's in a maximum security prison. He's not allowed to be around any other prisoners. He's in solitary confinement 22, 23 hours a day. He is really, the John Pillinger gave a really great speech just this week. And he was talking about how he's in the medical healthcare ward, but he is checked on every 30 minutes. He's spied on. And he said it was suicide watch. Like he's checked on constantly. He's not allowed to really get a whole lot of visitors. He's barely allowed to see his lawyers. He can't call his American lawyers. He can't call his family in Australia. He hasn't had access to a computer or really court documents. His mail has been held at various times for months on end. When it would be time for him to go have a visitor, they would schedule doctor appointments at that time. His father and other people that visit him would say he'd be 45 minutes late. So it was like they were constantly doing this sort of dominant control over him, and even the people visiting him on, really showing dominance of like who's in control, what you're allowed and not allowed to do. John Pillinger wrote, basically his speech was published by Consortium News, and there's a video too. You can watch it from the Free the Truth event this week, and it really gives a really grim overview of what he's going through. And really, we're seeing even more of those signs of psychological torture here. And we did get a glimpse of him in the police van on October 21st after that hearing. If you watch that footage, they were really trying to be dodgy about what van he was coming and going in, and abruptly just happened to find him sitting in a van for 2 hours afterwards. And he looked terrible. Like he just looks terrible. And
was it that he lost 15 pounds?
15 kilos. Yeah, they said he's lost, since April. He's lost a lot of weight. He looks, a lot of people said during that hearing, he could barely say his name and his birth date. He was he said he's having a hard time thinking. I mean, this man's an intellectual genius. He could probably defend himself without, he's, I think, one of these people that could learn anything and do anything he would want and be successful. And here he was on trial, at a hearing, and he could barely even say his name and his birth date. And that's like Craig Murray wrote a great article about that. A lot of people said, wow, they could tell like he's being tortured. He came in limping. People in the gallery were crying over it because it just, he's talking about being spied on. He's talking about his family, his children being spied on. And he's mentally not probably in a great place right now. I mean, not only physically, and I don't know if any of those pain issues are really being addressed. And
right.
I think it was Lissa Johnson had a really great quote that you you can't help a torture victim while he's still being tortured. Like he's still in the midst of torture, and it's, you know, he might be in the healthcare ward, but it's not like they're helping him recover from that. They're just continuing.
It's just a Band-Aid kind of.
Yeah,
and I think
that was a label.
That was probably the intention of that letter written by those 65 health professionals, which is that he needs to actually get out of there and actually needs to be treated outside, because this is in a hospital. The Belmarsh is for high tech for terrorists, right? That's where they go. And again, it's you can expect that their treatment is going to be harsh, but this is for Assange, who is just a journalist. Yeah,
he's a non-violent prisoner, and he's being put with murderers and terrorists, and I mean, this is their form of Gitmo, essentially. And this is, and they're holding him without reason, essentially now. They denied bail, saying he essentially was a flight risk, but like his father said, where's he gonna go? Like, you know, so it's he's not being allowed to be treated by his own doctors. He's being taken care of by the state, which is obviously not trustworthy. They have spent millions of pounds surveilling him and, you know, essentially stalking him outside the embassy. And it's really not, it's hard to put any faith in that he's getting good healthcare in this situation.
And then my other question was regarding the court proceedings. I recall reading about how he's unable, they're unable to gather that information that he can use to defend himself, because he's not able to get all the documents that he had at the Ecuadorian embassy, that he was just completely removed from there. And as a result, he doesn't have those documents that he could use as defense.
So to refer back to that John Pilger interview, he was talking about how Julian's, like his personal like effects, like his reading glasses, his clothes, they wouldn't let him take anything with him when they arrested him, and they just said everything will come later, and it took months to get his reading glasses. And none of his writings, he's been in there for 7 years, probably lots of work on his defense, and he doesn't have access to those now. And who knows, those are probably in the hands of the US now, because Ecuador essentially handed those things over. So for a long period of time, his lawyers couldn't even bring in paperwork. It had to be posted by mail to him. Well, his mail was also being held, and Belmarsh goes through any mail that's coming in and any mail that's coming out. So when, you know, he gets to these hearings and they ask him if he understands what's going on, he hasn't even had a chance, probably in some cases, to read everything yet, or really
his condition makes it even like that much harder, where he can't even probably process the information that he's trying to.
Exactly.
My other question then is, are there any other ways that the government has tried to limit his ability to defend himself besides just not letting him have those documents? Are there any other ways that they've gone?
I mean, so not letting him have access to his lawyers, not letting him talk to his American lawyer, making it very difficult to get court documents to him. He doesn't have access to a computer to type or, you know, probably even read these documents. I mean, the psychological torture in general, to make him mentally, like you said, have a difficult time. So when he is meeting with his lawyers, or when he is able to get his hands on court documents, and you know, then bringing the Swedish case back up to be another alarming worry that now he has to fight this. So it's just kind of these layers of just constant harassment, constant torture, psychological torture, physical. They said before the October 21st hearing, he was strip searched and thrown into a hot box before he came out to court. He's in solitary confinement in a maximum security prison. Why would you need to strip search him before he leaves to go to his hearing? You know, so this is, you know, for lack of a better term, this is just the US fucking with him via the UK. I mean, all of this is our government you know, trying to establish dominance and just trying to mess with him and torture him and break him.
Mm-hmm. And I think also something else that makes it even more troubling is the magistrate Emma Arbuthnot. I don't know how you say it. Is that how you say it?
Yeah,
I wasn't sure how to pronounce it. I had read it, but I never knew how to pronounce it.
Yeah, I haven't actually heard her name pronounced.
Oh, okay. So I'm not. I don't feel that.
Arbuthnot, I think, but
okay,
I could be wrong too.
So Emma, I guess. So she is still involved in this case, even though they did some investigations and they found that I believe her son and even her husband, they have some loose ties, and I think her son is the one that has a lot of ties to MI6 and a couple of, and also I believe it was like an anti-leak company.
Yeah, so there's like these military and cybersecurity companies that have been exposed by WikiLeaks that I believe her husband has ties to, and yeah, just recently, her son has ties to these GCHQ and MI15, or you know, yeah, the stop data leaks issues. So there's a lot of conflicting interests here, and the last I knew, I was checking up on this today, is Jen Robinson had said, one of Julian Assange's lawyers, that she was not, she's no longer going to be on the case. So Consortium News actually reached out to her to get some more details on that. Does that mean she's no longer overseeing it? I think she sat on maybe one or two of the earlier hearings. Does that mean she's no longer sitting, but maybe she still has somewhat of influence on the judges that are sitting on the case? So not really sure what capacity she is or isn't involved in anymore. And so still kind of waiting on details on if she hasn't officially recused herself yet, but yeah, all this is coming out, and huge conflict of interest. So yeah, I'm hoping we get more details on that, especially before the extradition hearing in February on is she involved in this or not. And there are ways, I believe, in the UK that you can file a complaint. I don't know if you have to be a UK citizen or if anybody outside the UK can do it. I think non-UK citizens might be able to, but I believe you can file complaints with the court on this, and some people have started doing that.
Okay, that's good at least. Yeah, because I remember when
I can get you find those links too.
Yeah, awesome. Because I remember it was like 2 weeks ago where those came out, and I imagine I really hope that because of that documentation and that, and you know, that investigation that they did, it'll make, even if it doesn't necessarily pressure the government and whatnot, it'll pressure her to feel like she can't do that, and that it'll get to her ego, I guess, where it's like she feels like she's been exposed, and you know. So my other question would also be, what can we do then to pressure the government, and how can, like, what is the solution for freeing Assange?
It's a complicated question because we are up against this. It's not just our government, it's the military industrial complex. It's the deep state, if you will. It's the non-elected officials that are pursuing this. I mean, the Trump administration is obviously the ones going full-fledged with this. His Department of Justice, you know, and the Obama administration explored it, but didn't actually pursue it. So really, we've got to rise up as a people, Americans, people in the UK, people everywhere, and really let our politicians know, let our candidates know that this is something that's important to us, and that we don't want to see this happen, and that we are going to vote out the people we can and cannot who do support Assange. I think peaceful actions, as much as possible, are important too. And in the US, that is starting to really take shape the last 2 years or so. That's one of the reasons Andrew and I, my co-host from Free Assange Vigil, want to go to DC, and we want to send Taylor and Steve to London to cover the hearing, is that Andrew and I want to gather as many people as we can on the US side to demonstrate peacefully in DC to show that we as Americans do not support our government doing this. And we as Americans find free press and free speech important, and you know, allowing Assange to be extradited here and charged through a show trial and put in prison for 175 years, it's not okay. Like, that is going to destroy our First Amendment. It's going to destroy journalism, not only here, but in other countries. That gives the US power to extradite any journalist anywhere just because they're mad that their secrets got exposed. I mean, this is what it's coming down to. Is a lot of people talk about, well, Assange needs to stand trial. He needs to go through the process and get justice. Justice for what? For being a journalist, for publishing truths? Like, he didn't break any laws. He published factual truth that, you know, nobody has denied. The United States government has testified in Chelsea Manning's trial in 2013 that they have no evidence that anyone was killed due to these leaks or hurt or endangered. So that's another scenario here with this, is that, well, Assange got people killed by these leaks, so he needs to fess up, and he needs to you know, serve time for what he did. And that's just simply not true. And the United States has even admitted under oath it's not true. And so, yeah, we really have to educate people, for one, because a lot of people don't understand the situation. A lot of people are listening to the mainstream media narratives on this and then taking action, and doing things like what you and I are doing, having conversations with people, reading and sharing links on very well written articles that are not based on smears, and taking action where you live, coming to DC in February with us, and writing to your politicians, whether you're in the US, Australia, UK. This really has to be a voice of the people that help Assange here.
So in terms of what we can do to get our politicians to enact change, what are some ways that could happen? Like, how exactly would it just be like, let's say, you know, Tulsi Gabbard, she said that she would, you know, that she would prevent him from being extradited to the United States. How do you know exactly how that would work? Because that's always been something, because I'm assuming that it's a complicated process. It's not just easy where you can just say, yeah, this is not going to happen. But
yeah, so I mean, as far as Tulsi goes, I think she's said she would pardon Julian Assange, Snowden, Chelsea Manning, and as far as really just dropping all the charges so that the extradition request would be null and void, as far as I understand it. Really, you've got these indictments that have come from the DOJ, and then you have with that the extradition request to bring him here to charge him and try him on these indictments. And so really standing up, there's a motion in the UK, I believe, is still going on for MPs to sign up to kind of stand up against, not only stand up for the way he's being treated, but stand up against the extradition as a whole. It would be really amazing for somebody like Tulsi to introduce that into Congress, and to get something like that.
So there's some kind of way that she could do that, like, or any other politician?
I think that has been discussed, and I know you asked her to speak up on it, again recently. I don't know. I know she was given kind of a I don't know if you want to call it a blueprint idea on how she could introduce something like that. I haven't heard what more has come of that, if that is something she will actually pursue or not.
I know she was working on legislation to amend the Espionage Act, but I don't know if, as a result, then that could be used to support, Assange and to prevent
maybe, and maybe depending on what amendments she's doing, because the Espionage Act has sort of been broken down over time to make it looser and more widespread. So yeah, if she's trying to close it down and tighten it up, that might then dismiss the charges. I don't know. I'm not sure what she's got in the works as far as that.
And then in terms of the charges that the Swedish government has, those have already been dropped. Well,
so there were
allegations.
Never any charges in Sweden, but that whole investigation has been closed.
Okay.
And I believe the statute of limitations on the rest of that, what was being investigated, will expire in August of 2022. So
okay,
it really hopefully should stay dead in the water now.
Yeah, that's good. And I guess so. In terms of his hearings, those extradition hearings are going to be in February of 2020, and then those are the ones that you guys are trying to raise money to be able to cover, correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So that they're.
And then,
go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say, anyone is free to go, or do you have to have some kind of?
Well, so one of the big things that was announced with the October 21st hearing was that most of the hearings have been held at Westminster Magistrates Court in the middle of London. Now they are moving it to Belmarsh Jail, which is outside of London. And I believe the courtrooms are not quite as large. So it's already sort of a process to get into the court, depending on if he's appearing video link or he's there in person, depends on how big the room they get. And you have to line up, and there's only so many, public gallery seats or press seats. I think that from what I've heard, depending on what court it's in Belmarsh, that's an even smaller chance, and so smaller number of seats. So I mean, yeah, it's really the judge that did this is really pushing it even further out of the public eye. I mean, we've had a hard enough time getting accurate reporting and getting people to cover this, and now we're pushing it outside of the public eye, and we're now putting it into a place where he doesn't even have to leave, so there's no chance of the public seeing him. He doesn't, it's all internal in Belmarsh, so nobody's going to see him come and go, and even fewer members of the public and the press are going to be able to get in there to really see what's going on. And it was supposed to be a 5-day hearing, and that was another thing that they discussed in October, was they may or may not actually let it have 5 days. His lawyers asked for a continuance because in Spain there is a current case going on over all this illegal surveilling, and they want that case to wrap up to use that evidence and bring it into his extradition hearing. And so they wanted more time so that case could finish.
Was that the 5 months that they wanted, the extra?
I think it was a 3-month delay they were asking for, which is pretty standard from my understanding. And they were denied that. Now, there is a case management hearing on December 19th. And I've noticed on the defendwikileaks.org page, there is a note saying that the dates will be discussed again. So I have no idea if they get another chance to maybe ask for another delay, or it will just be nailing down these dates in February more with times. So maybe more to come on that. Would be interesting if they were able to get that delay, so that the UK now, at first when the Spanish court case asked to interview Julian Assange, the UK blocked it. And an article came out today that said now the UK has approved that Julian Assange can speak to these prosecutors, probably give some sort of testimony via video link. So we'll see if maybe that is going to help push the Spanish case forward, so that they can maybe use that evidence in his extradition hearing as well.
So is he able to communicate with his lawyers now, for this extradition, for these extradition hearings in February?
I've heard he gets a little bit more as far as more visits. John Pillager said this week he's still not able to be in communication with his American lawyer, so I'm not sure really how many more visits he's getting and how often his lawyers are getting access to him. And again, how his mental, physical state is to be productive in these meetings. it's been difficult for them to really get the time they should have access to him. I mean, they should be able to, he should not be in prison essentially, and he should be able to be with his lawyers as much as possible, and he should be able to be somewhere where he can be getting treatment that's not by the state, his own doctors, and able to heal and actually focus on this.
Right, because he already served that term that he was supposed to for the bail, right?
Yeah, that expired September 22nd. Yeah.
Yeah. So then now he's just being.
Now he's just being held as a political prisoner essentially, and
he shouldn't be there then. He should be available to talk to his lawyers and until February, I'm assuming.
Yeah, he should be able to be free and prepare for this hearing. He should not be imprisoned waiting this hearing.
And I guess my question would then be, what happens if he's not able to be present in those hearings? Do you think that his lawyers will be able to defend him, enough without having, all those documents that they could have access to from the Ecuadorian embassy and whatnot?
Yeah. I'm not entirely sure if he is not able to be physically present, if they will delay it. That's an interesting question because I'm sure his lawyers are trying to obtain those documents or whatever he needs from the embassy. I can't really speak to what the legal team is or isn't doing, but I know they did delay a hearing previously earlier in the year during the summer because he was unwell to the point where he couldn't even appear via video link. So now that the hearing is going to be in Belmarsh, I don't know. We'll see how his condition is as far as how he would be appearing then.
Yeah, because it would be really difficult if he can't defend himself, but then if his lawyers aren't even able to have that information where they could do that for him.
Yeah, definitely.
Really. And then with these extradition hearings, what would be discussed? They would just look at his case and then see whether or not he will be extradited. And then do you think that right now I guess people who are supporting WikiLeaks and supporting Assange, do they feel as though he definitely will be extradited, or do they feel like there is some chance where, in terms of the movements in the UK and with their politicians there showing support for Assange, do you think that that'll change?
So the hearing itself will be, each side presenting evidence and making their case for or against extradition. I'm not entirely sure if actual result will be in that same time frame. It could be even, everybody presents their cases and then it takes a few weeks for a decision. So I just, I'm not sure what that process will look like. After that, it will go to an appeals court, likely depending whichever side, gets the decision. I think either way, it's going to go to the appeals court, the high court in the UK, and that could take months to get, that ball rolling. So there will be a process as far as appealing it at some point, and I'm sure the US would try to appeal if they rule in favor of Julian. So as far as how is it going to go, I think the UK hearings so far have showed us that there is a lot of corruption in the UK justice system, that these judges are not sympathetic, that they are not, they don't care if he can or cannot prepare for his hearing. I would say, based on how these hearings have gone, I wouldn't expect the UK to rule in favor, because it seems like, to take a line from John Carrico, it seems like the fix is in, and we talk a lot about how if he comes to the US, if he's extradited to the US, he would get a show trial and there would not be any justice here. There would be no fair trial. the grand jury secrecy process would keep everything under wraps, and I'm sure it would be declared national security. So none of the testimony or the evidence would be seen. And the jury itself would be made up of people who have intelligence agency ties from the Eastern District of Virginia. So it really feels to me that we're seeing a preview of that in the UK, that they are not going to let actual justice happen. And really it's going to take these movements, perhaps Australia, to step in. I think John Pillinger said this week that perhaps even the new UK Home Secretary could step in, and because they have to sign off on the extradition, so they could perhaps stop it. So
it depends on if they're influenced by the US and if they give in.
Yeah, it really depends on who in the government could step in, and if they're being influenced by the US and are a pawn of the American empire to continue this on.
Yeah, that's, it's really heartbreaking. Like, I've read some of, John Pilger's stuff, and I've watched some interviews that he's had. And does he go often to visit him? How does it work? Because it's so limited for people to be able to visit.
It sounds like he has gotten to see Julian quite often. His father gets to see him. I mean, I would say at least it seems like John Shipton is talking about maybe once a month. I hear him kind of talking about maybe even more than that now, that after if he's gotten a few more visits, allowances. So yeah, I think he is getting more visits, and I don't know for sure how many more, but yeah, it's quite John Pilger explained the process you have to go through to get to see him, as far as physically walk through, leaving all your items and going through all these rounds of security. It's quite disheartening and quite upsetting to hear about. And I think, when people do come out of Belmarsh and give any sort of public statement, they all look a little jarred. They all look a little like, nobody's obviously happy to be in a prison, but I think it's quite an eye-opener to go through that maximum security prison just to go visit somebody.
Yeah. And it's only 1 hour really a day that Assange has to himself, to be able to visit people, right? Or where he's not with.
I really think it's only like he might get maybe 2 or 3 visits a week, every 2 weeks. So I mean, he's that hour he's not in solitary confinement. They've talked about how when they move him through the prison, they go on lockdown, so he doesn't really get to mingle with anybody. John Pilger talked about he does get to go to sort of like a kind of a chapel thing, and get to see other prisoners. But that's really it.
It's a lot to take in.
Yeah, it's very heavy, and it's I was kind of going through today, just kind of listening to things and rereading things on especially after this talk on the 28th, and it's very upsetting. It's like it turns your stomach that what is being done essentially in broad daylight, because people are talking about this. It's well known. We know what's happening to him in there, and it's just being allowed to happen. That the US is essentially torturing a journalist in the UK, I mean, by proxy with the UK, for publishing war crimes.
And it's a dangerous precedent set too, and it sends a really dangerous, message to any journalist. But yeah, I mean, that's why I wanted to have you on, because there's so much. I've only really been familiar with this for only a couple of months, so there's so much disinformation that you have to go, that you have to seep through and try to discern what's real, what's just a part of the smear campaign.
Yep.
So to me, it's really important, the work that you guys do, in terms of education and activism. So I really wanted to thank you for taking the time to come on. And I don't know if you have anything else that you wanted to add that you feel is important. any information or any resources or anything.
Yeah, I encourage everybody to go to defend.wikileaks.org. There are updates there on Julian's situation. There's an amazing timeline. Go to wikileaks.org, start reading about the leaks yourself, introduce yourself to Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. You can go to Unity4J's Pinterest library. There's over 5,000 pins, and just about every Julian Assange video interview is there. Many of his written interviews are there, other people's articles and interviews. All of our visuals from Unity4J are documented there, tons of quotes and footage. And you know, come to Action for Assange YouTube page. Our visuals are there. We have them every Wednesday night. We're really trying to consistently talk about all the new news every week. There's so much happening right now. Keeping people updated. We've kind of found ourselves in the middle of now WikiLeaks doing new drops. So that's been an exciting thing that we've been exploring those live together. And we do like to interview activists on there as well, and really kind of keep the February dates open. We'll be starting to announce what locations we're going to be at in DC. Support independent media, there aren't very many of us, but support independent media that is trying to cover this. A lot of us are volunteering. This isn't our full-time job. We have other things, you know, we got to pay the bills, but we are all taking time to accurately report on this. And if we can do it, then you can't tell me that the mainstream media can't get it right, you know? So yeah, like you said, we are fundraising to help us get there. And really that money is going to pay for plane tickets, for lodging, maybe some food while we're there. And, you know, while we're trying to have actions and, you know, pay for some flyers and posters, like we're really trying to do this on a shoestring budget. And
how far are you? Do you know? Like, what's your goal? How far? I don't know if you know.
We're trying to raise about $4,800. So yeah, we're just a little ways into it. We would really appreciate if you can't donate, please share the GoFundMe link.
Yeah, everyone, please, too. If you have, you know, I think GoFundMe, I think the minimum is $5. I'm not sure. Might be wrong. But.
Yeah, it might be. But really, and we plan to be very transparent with how we use the money too, because we know that is a big thing too. We don't want people to feel like we are taking advantage of them. And if you can come to DC, if you're in America, come to DC with us and help us.
Do you have the dates set out, or you're gonna?
Yeah. So as of right now, it's the week of February 24th, and we're kind of planning things for each day, different locations we want to be at. But that is subject to change. So just kind of keep that in mind. We're hoping after this next case management hearing on December 19th that we can really solidify those dates, hoping, and then we can start kind of getting plane tickets and booking stuff and really inviting. We're hoping to get different people, high profile people, to be involved too with us. And Andrew and I will be streaming, as well as Taylor and Steve will hopefully be in London streaming and keeping us updated. And really just trying to bring as much awareness as possible. And because we're going to be right in the middle of, you know, the primary season here in America. Who knows what's going to happen with all this impeachment stuff. There's going to be a lot of other things that the media is going to distract you with and probably not do a very good job reporting on this. So we want to make sure that this information gets out to the people and they know what's happening. And it's just going to encourage people to rise up peacefully and demand more of their government, as far as not pursuing and persecuting journalists, and that we support WikiLeaks and we support the kind of journalism, the scientific journalism that Julian Assange has established with WikiLeaks.
And if people want to get involved with the Unity4J campaign, is there any way for them to do that?
Yeah, so you can follow Unity4J on Twitter. What we're doing right now is trying to amplify a lot of people's actions on the ground there. So if you are planning an action in your area, please send us a message, let us know. We would love to help promote that. And we also have a Discord server still that we're still very active on, as far as planning events, helping people with graphics, whatever they need to get their action up and going. And yeah, so that's while Unity4J has discontinued their vigils, we are still active as far as supporting activists around the world.
And then you guys advertise the events if anyone wants to check out any vigils that you guys are doing in real life.
Yeah. And then so then Action for Assange has kind of picked up that vigil torch and having those weekly vigils on what's currently going on from week to week. Yeah.
All right. Is there anything else you wanted to add?
I don't think so. Thank you for having me on.
Yes, thank you so much. You answered so many questions that I had and that other people had too. And to me, I think it gives you a lot of clarity, and and it just reminds us of why we should always support Assange and WikiLeaks. So
I'm happy to come on.
Yes.
And anytime you need, as things progress and we get more information and things change, I'm happy to come on. And so
yes, you're always welcome. If you feel like there's something that you need to explain, in your own words, as someone who's familiar with all of this, you're always welcome.
Thank you.
And I'm sure the audience loved to have you today, and I'm sure you answered some of their questions too.
Yeah, hopefully, yeah. But yeah, it's just everybody just go out there and find a Julian Assange video and like tweet it out, like just amplifying his words, his quotes. He's an amazing intellect, and he has a way with words of explaining some very complicated things. And I just I really love kind of coming across, seeing somebody tweet an old video of him explaining his thoughts on things. And I really think keeping his voice going while he can't speak for himself, amplifying him during this time is really one of the best ways we can kind of defeat these constant smears and character assassinations. So yeah.
Absolutely. All right, Christy. Well, thank you so much for coming on. You're welcome anytime, like I said. But thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes. All right. Bye.
Bye.